What's your favourite urban legend? Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Today, as you will have seen from the title and thumbnail, we are taking a deep dive into the world of 1998 urban legend. When a series of murders takes place in and around Pendleton University, Natalie, our final girl, begins to suspect that the deaths are inspired by various urban legends. Urban Legend was written by Silvio Horta, who also wrote the TV series Ugly Betty, and was directed by Jamie Blanks, who went on to direct Valentine. It stars Alicia Witt, Jared Leto, Rebecca Gayheart and Loretta Devine, with roles and cameos from horror alumni Robert Englund, Brad Dourif and Danielle Harris. Urban Legend was a financial success on release and is considered to be one of the strongest slasher movies to come out in the wake of Scream. Its success meant that 2 sequels followed. Urban Legend Final Cut released theatrically in 2000 and Urban Legend Bloody Mary released direct-to-video in 2005. But today, we're going back to the beginning and taking a look at the film that began the franchise. We'll be taking a look into the film's production, its cast and crew, its final girl, the kills, and the killer. Plus, we'll take a closer look at, in my opinion, one of the best cold open scenes in a slasher film. Just a heads up, this episode will contain spoilers, so bear that in mind if you haven't seen the film yet. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, horror was waning, and aside from a few strong entries in the form of Candyman, Misery and Silence of the Lambs, horror was reduced to entries in long-running franchises. And according to Peter Brack, author of Crystal Lake Memories and Scary Movies, young audiences were no longer scared by Jason, Freddy and Michael. According to Brack, studios wanted a film that could reconnect with the younger audiences and reignite that excitement for and interest in the horror genre. And in 1996, Scream was released and did exactly that. Suddenly, there was this new film that was fresh and exciting and, most importantly, financially successful. And as with the success of Halloween back in 1978, all of the studios now wanted to make horror movies in the same vein as Scream, cashing in on that financial success. Suddenly, horror films, especially these teen slashers emulating Scream, were given bigger budgets of between $14 to $17 million and a big marketing campaign. But one film that struggled to get off the ground initially was Urban Legend. Urban Legend's writer Silvio Horta was recently graduated from New York University and working as a fragrance sprayer at department store Nordstrom. He pitched his story idea to Gina Matthews, a producer working with a group of young writers at the time, in a writer's workshop that she was running. After Gina liked the idea, Silvio turned the story into a screenplay and he and Gina then pitched it to studios. At some point, producer Neil Moritz came on board as co-producer, having previously just produced I Know What You Did Last Summer in the year before, 1997. After no studio wanted to fund the film, the team took the screenplay to a brand new company called Phoenix Pictures, who loved the idea and picked up the film. Urban Legend's director Jamie Blanks, from Australia and 26 at the time, had originally wanted to direct I Know What You Did Last Summer, and impressed producer Neil Moritz with a mock-up trailer he had made to show his vision for the film. Unfortunately for Blanks, Jim Gillespie had already been hired to direct I Know, but Neil Moritz had been so impressed with Blanks that he wanted him to direct Urban Legend. In terms of casting, Jared Leto was the biggest name on the cast at the time. He was apparently the name the production crew hoped would draw an audience in. And then having got Leto, that then allowed them to have more freedom casting everyone else, and so, according to the crew, they chose who was best for the role rather than just going for big names. I feel like that should always be what's important when casting. But hey, look, I get it. I know it doesn't always work that way. Now, I want to be as delicate as I can with what I'm about to say next, but I think I'm personally missing something when it comes to Alicia Witt, who plays final girl Natalie. In the behind the scenes footage, she is described as a great actress and was cast because of that. Alicia was also quote-unquote discovered by David Lynch, who cast her in Dune back in 1984 and the TV series Twin Peaks in 1990. And I respect David Lynch as a filmmaker, but I am baffled because I find her portrayal of Natalie mostly wooden and sometimes bizarre. Now granted, I haven't seen her in anything else, so I'm not the fairest of judges, but in my opinion, Natalie is the weakest element of Urban Legend. Alicia Witt was apparently also cast because she was, quote, against type, unquote. She wasn't like your standard final girl. And I'm not sure I would agree with this statement because in terms of appearance, to me she looks a lot like both Ginny in Friday the 13th Part 2 and Alice in Nightmare on Elm Street 4. But I wholeheartedly agree with Robert Englund that the true star of Urban Legend is Rebecca Gayheart, who plays Brenda. But the funny thing is, she nearly didn't get the role. She apparently had to read, reread, and read again. Rebecca has said in interviews that she really had to fight for this role, but luckily it was a role she was determined to get and willing to put the work in for. In behind-the-scenes footage, Englund describes Gayheart's performance at the end of the film as fresh, original, and scary, and claims she may actually be the best thing in the movie. And after the concept for the kills, I'm inclined to agree. Joshua Jackson was cast because he was a known name thanks to Dawson's Creek, which had aired earlier in 1998. But the crew apparently loved him so much and thought he did such a great job with the role that they were genuinely gutted that Jackson's character is the second to be killed off and wish they had been able to rewrite it slightly to allow Jackson to have more screen time. Michael Rosenbaum, who I mostly know as Lex Luthor in Smallville, was just starting out as an actor, and the role of Parker was originally going to go to a different actor. But the director, Jamie Blanks, impressed with his audition, really wanted, in fact was adamant, that he wanted Michael Rosenbaum for the role. Robert Englund stars as Professor Wexler and was apparently initially interested in the concept of the film, but was also interested in a couple of the cast names, and he said, quote, wanted to be part of that cast. I mean, it can't hurt to have Robert Englund in your horror movie as a draw for more established audiences. Aside from a couple of established names, a lot of the cast and crew on Urban Legend were young, in their 20s, and for a lot of them, this was their first film, or at least their first feature film. And what comes across from all of the interviews and the behind the scenes footage is just how much the creative team behind the Urban Legend really loved this film. They all talk about how well everyone got on, hanging out on set and off set. There was a lot of support for each other's talents and efforts, and so many positive things said about director Jamie Blanks and the set that he created. Urban Legend had a really quick turnaround, with filming taking place between April and July of 1998. The film was then edited in just under 2 months and had its release in September 1998. Filming was mostly night shoots between 5 p.m. and 4 a.m. The crew would start setup at 5 p.m, checking lighting and cameras, and then as soon as the sun went down, as soon as it got dark, they would start filming and keep going until the sun came up at about 4 a.m. They were filming Urban Legend in Toronto, Canada, and so the nights there were incredibly short, so they really had to get what they could. In terms of a location for Pendleton University, producer Gina Matthews said they had wanted something that felt East Coast, very scary and very dark, and they ultimately decided on the University of Toronto because they loved how every inch of the building was architecturally interesting and gothic. The aesthetic of the building allowed them to create a juxtaposition of a modern horror movie with a young cast, contrasted with traditional tales of folklore set in an old Gothic setting. And as with many good film locations, the university became a character within itself. Something that stood out to me when watching interviews with cast and crew was a comment made by director of photography James Chrysanthis, and it made me think how it's so funny to see attitudes towards horror changing over the years. Back in the day, horror movie was such a derogative term, whereas nowadays they're taken far more seriously, and we've certainly seen an increase in mainstream horror releases. But according to the DP back in 1998, the crew apparently agreed that they were making a movie, not a horror movie, because, quote, if you call it just a horror movie, then it reduces what we were trying to do, so we took a very serious approach, unquote. I think I kind of get what he's trying to say, but I also think it's a little bit insulting to and dismissive of the genre. And it's also interesting that he says they were going for a Hitchcock Spielberg feel, seeing as how some of their most famous films are Psycho and Jaws, horror movies. Now, in my opinion, Urban Legend has one of the greatest slasher movie cold opens. It is up there with Scream as far as I'm concerned. And it's not hard to see why when you see the similarities and obvious inspirations taken from Scream's cold open. As with Casey Becker in Scream, the audience latch onto our female character, in this case Michelle Mancini, and follow her in a seemingly innocent situation. She's driving in her car, she's singing, and similar to Casey making popcorn ready to watch a horror movie. They're both scenarios that we as an audience can instantly relate to. We can put ourselves in the shoes of these women. And just like with Casey in Scream, the danger has already begun as soon as the movie opens. For Casey, it was the phone call that happens in the opening seconds of the film. And for Michelle, it's her own car where the killer is hidden in the back seat. For the audience, there are moments in both Scream and Urban Legend where we finally realise that the character is in danger. When Ghostface says to Casey, I want to know who I'm looking at, and when Michelle goes into the gas station. But for both characters, they are in danger from the very beginning, and their fate is both sealed and inescapable as soon as the movie opens. And while the fact that you're watching a horror movie lets you know something is going to happen, I do love the drawn out moments before we finally get to the kill. I also love how both cold opens could be a short film within themselves. They're enough of a story and creepy enough within themselves to work as a standalone. The opening scene of Urban Legend is really beautifully crafted. The heavy rain and lightning helps to create an ominous atmosphere, which is then nicely balanced out with humour injected through Sasha's radio show. But one of the smartest little details is the fact that Michelle ends up singing along to Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler, whose lyrics are literally imploring Michelle to turn around, because there's a killer in her back seat. It's so good. There's also a moment where Michelle drives past a petrol station, or gas station, and the camera holds on it after she's driven past. This petrol station is well lit and full of people, giving it the appearance of being safe. It's like the film is showing the audience, look, she could have survived if she'd stopped here instead. It's playing with the audience and almost saying, ooh, so close. But as we know retrospectively, this would never have actually saved her. There's also a great twist on expectations and the misjudgment of people. Brad Dourif stars in a cameo role as Michael McDonald, the attendant at the petrol station that Michelle stops at. And while I'm sure most of us would agree Brad Dourif is a wonderful addition in any film, his behaviour in this scene leads Michelle to believe that he is dangerous. He lures Michelle out of her car by saying her credit card company wants to speak to her on the phone, and then locks the door behind them. We discover this was all done to protect Michelle, but his stutter prevents him from being able to explain the situation quickly and clearly enough, and is attacked by Michelle. It's a great twist that what appears to be dangerous is actually her chance at safety. But I did think about this situation that Michelle is in, and while it's a great play on misjudging people based on appearance, I do also think, fair enough. I mean, Michelle is on her own and has to judge the situation based on the information she has, and a stranger did just lock her in with him. But honestly, who wouldn't get chills at Brad Dourif's amazing delivery of the line? Someone's in the back seat! Another similarity to Scream is Urban Legend's hook. This time its kills are inspired by Urban Legends, and as with Scream, the characters in Urban Legend are aware of this link, which then allows them to have discussions about the legends and their hidden messages. In fact, the lecture led by Robert Englund's Professor Wexler is very reminiscent of a lot of Randy's speeches about horror films. The great thing about the first film is that it's starting from scratch. We've not seen this before, so they can include any any urban legend that they want to. The sequels had the tougher job of following on from the original film that contained what could be argued as the most well-known legends. The urban legends used or referenced in the film range from the popular legends of an axe killer hidden in the back seat, dying from eating Pop Rocks and soda, and the babysitter and the call coming from inside the house. Another popular legend included is the one of the boy and girl making out in a car and the boyfriend ends up being killed and hung from a tree. This one is interesting because it may be the one with the most varying versions. This is even addressed in fellow 90s slasher film I Know What You Did Last Summer, where the 4 leads are telling ghost stories and each one knows a different version of this story. Some know it as a hooked killer, some know it as the boy is hung from a tree, and another one says the boy was actually decapitated. Urban legend goes with the version of the boyfriend being hung from the tree, but with the wonderful twist that it is the girl, in this case our final girl Natalie, that is the cause of the death by driving the car away. There are also lesser known legends such as drying the dog in the microwave, the Love roller coaster song, high beam gang initiation, and spider eggs in the bubblegum. Just the thought of that one is disgusting. Perhaps 2 of the most famous legends are only skirted around in the first film. The legend of Bloody Mary, which Natalie and Brenda attempt outside the dorm building in a very strange way, and the kidney heist, which Brenda plans to do to Natalie but is stopped. And what's interesting about these 2 is that they would come back to play a big part in the sequels. The kidney heist is perhaps the darkest and most impressive kill scene in Final Cut, and then Bloody Mary is the premise of the 3rd film, also titled Bloody Mary. Urban legend is interesting in terms of its final girl and the events that surround her. As far as I can tell, there seem to be 3 types of final girl. There's the one who for the majority of the runtime are unscathed and then finally discover what's happening at the end of the film. Think Halloween and Friday the 13th. Then we have the one who is targeted throughout along with her circle of friends. Think Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. But urban legend is the 3rd kind and the rarer kind, at least I think, correct me if I'm wrong. And that's the final girl that witnesses and experiences everything, but they're not believed by their friendship group. Think Nancy Thompson in Nightmare on Elm Street. This is what we have in urban legend. Our final girl Natalie was connected to all of the victims, even witnessing some of the deaths, but no one believes her, not campus staff or her friends. This helps to isolate our final girl, which is important because she is ultimately the main target. All of the events and kills are to torture and punish Natalie for her involvement in the death of Brenda's fiance. Now, I personally love that this suffering ends up pushing Natalie into the arms and lips of journalist Paul, who also happens to be the new object of Brenda's desire. It's so fun to have our final girl inadvertently get one over on the killer. But this brings me on to another point about urban legend's final girl. Like a lot of 90s final girls, Natalie is no longer the virginal innocent of previous decades. Natalie is not only partly responsible for the death of an innocent teen, but she also macks on the guy her best friend has been openly pursuing. Not cool now. It's interesting to have a final girl that I don't particularly root for. Director Jamie Blanks wanted the kills in Urban Legend to be suggestive, implied, rather than graphic and, quote, a gore fest, unquote. And he draws comparisons between Urban Legend and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. Writer Silvio Horta said in the behind the scenes feature that on release of the film, one critic had described Urban Legend as bloody and disgusting. So you can see the comparison Jamie Blanks is making with Texas Chainsaw, as this particular critic seems to think they saw something that wasn't actually in the film, the same way people often remember TCM as being far gorier than it actually is. It was apparently important to the crew that they never showed all of the kill, but rather to leave it to the audience's imagination. They believed in the approach of less is more. The less you see, the scarier it is. And I know some audiences complain about a lack of blood and gore, and I'm pretty sure I've commented on this myself in reviews. But I think there is a difference. There's a difference between a cutaway kill where you see nothing, and a kill where just enough is suggested, just enough is seen for you to fill in the blanks. I mean, at the end of the day, our own imagination is always worse than what we're shown. because we project our own fears onto it. I mentioned before that this seems to have been a pretty fun and supportive set to work on, but there was also apparently unity between the crew in terms of what type of film they wanted to make, and they all agreed that they wanted to lean more towards suspense and away from gratuitous violence. One thing I appreciate about Urban Legend is it doesn't use a lot of digital and instead uses mostly practical effects for the kills. For the Dean's death in the car park, a 70-something John Neville had to crawl on the floor away from a rolling car and then lay on the cold floor as a car rolled over him. To create this death, they created rubber spikes and elevated the car using dollies on each of the wheels. John would lie on the floor with rubber spikes coming out of him, and the elevated car would then roll over the top. Although my favourite fact about this kill scene is the fact that, according to cast and crew, while John was a professional and really delivered in his scenes, once he'd filmed his final scene, the death scene, he got up and left basically saying something along the lines of, "I'm leaving, go yourselves." To create Parker's death, they attached a rubber mouthpiece to the funnel so Michael Rosenbaum could hold it in his mouth. They would then pour the liquids down the funnel, which was blocked at the end, and Michael would then spit out liquid that he'd been holding in his mouth to give the appearance of his insides melting. According to Michael, what he loved about the kill is the foreshadowing of it earlier in the film. During the lecture by Wexler, Parker thinks it's hilarious when Damon pretends to die of pop rocks and soda. He's cheering him on, and yet that's how Parker ends up dying. Michael said, quote, "That's a cool way to die," unquote. Tara Reid apparently considers Sasha's death to be one of the best of all time, and it certainly is one of the biggest of the film because it's the one that is the most drawn out and is perhaps the death scene with the most stunts in it. And it's because of this point that it is also one that caused a few moments of panic amongst the crew. First of all, they apparently, according to Tara Reid, used a real axe, and there's a moment where the killer swings at Sasha and Tara and the axe almost made contact for real. And secondly, to get the shot of Sasha hanging from the stairs, they put Tara in a harness that was hidden under her outfit and her coat. She was stood on a scaffolding platform until they started filming, and then they would pull the scaffold away. The majority of the death scenes were not only practical, but also had the actors performing their own stunts. According to Danielle Harris, she had fallen before filming, dislocating her knee, and when she was doing her death scene where she's struggling on the bed, the stunt coordinator had to sit on the floor at the side of the bed and hold Danielle's legs straight to keep her damaged knee in place, just so she could do the death scene herself. For me personally, the kills in Urban Legend are some of the most interesting of the 90s slasher films. Not only are they varied and creative, but then there's this added fun for the audience of guessing or trying to figure out which urban legends will be chosen. And Parker's kill isn't the only one with foreshadowing. In the lecture, Damon pulls a prank by pretending to die of pop rocks and soda. So when he is actually killed later, no one believes it and dismisses it as Damon simply pulling a prank. At Parker's party, a boy is talking to Sasha about the song Love Roller Coaster, and the urban legend that the scream that you hear is the scream of a woman being killed over a 911 call, and when Sasha is later killed, her own screams are aired across the radio. Writer Silvio Horta describes Urban Legend of having a 10 Little Indians approach in terms of discovering who the killer is. 10 Little Indians is a film based off of Agatha Christie's book And Then There Were None, which follows a group of people staying at a house on an island and who get killed off one by one, lowering the suspect list and eventually revealing the killer. This is another way that Urban Legend emulates the Scream format. Unlike Jason or Michael, where it's just a masked killer killing, we now have the mystery element where not only do we need to find out who is killing, but why they're killing. To have the mystery whodunit, you need some red herrings scattered through your film, and the biggest ones in Urban Legend are the janitor, who is lingering in the background of scenes, and lead love interest journalist Paul. With the janitor, it's another case of a person being misjudged, based on appearance, similar to the cold open. But based off of previous horror films, the janitor is kind of a perfect suspect lurking in the shadows. I mean, he's very Scooby-Doo villain in terms of appearance. It was always the creepy janitor or the sinister manager or something in those cartoons. You know, you can just see it, the mask being whipped off. Oh my god! Ben Jones, the creepy janitor? I think that's what makes the killer's reveal all the more beautiful. Throughout the film, there were red herrings and misdirection from Paul, the janitor, and even Professor Wexler. But the way the film is both written and filmed, it never makes Brenda appear suspicious. There are no clues as to her identity. And the red herrings are all male and often, quote, creepy looking, unquote. But in the end, it's the sweet best friend, and it makes the reveal wonderfully shocking. I'm not the biggest fan of the third act of slashers. If I'm honest, I find them slightly boring and I tend to tune out at that point. But that isn't the case with Urban Legend, and that is in no small part to the incredible performance from Rebecca Gayheart. Her performance is wild enough to be fun, while never crossing into the ridiculous. And come on, how many villains use a quote, visual aid slideshow? Not even Bond villains had one of them. This is a villain who has a personal motive and admits to struggling with her mental health, but seems resigned to her state of mind and gives into it and gives into what she's doing 100%. And she has fun with it. And while some killers of 90s slashers meet their end, or seemingly meet their end only for a convenient ending in which it's left open for a sequel, in Urban Legend, Brenda survives and goes on to set up a new life in another university. This is a slasher film where the killer effectively wins. She punishes Michelle and Natalie like she intended, she got away with it, and she survived. Urban Legend was released in September 1998 and went on to make $72.5 million at the box office, making it a financial success on its $14 million budget. But despite it being financially successful, there were mixed reviews on it from critics, the main one being comparisons drawn to Scream, which had been released 2 years prior. It's hard to watch this film and not draw comparisons. I mean, I did it myself throughout this deep dive, yet there are enough strengths in Urban Legend for it to be praised outside of those similarities. And let's not forget that Friday the 13th was a Halloween ripoff, and how many horror films have ripped off The Exorcist. Its financial success also meant that 2 sequels were made in the following years, Urban Legend Final Cut in 2000 and Urban Legend Bloody Mary in 2005. Neither film was released to great reviews, but back in early 2020, it was announced that a reboot of the franchise was in development. This, however, was later cancelled due to certain worldwide events. On Urban Legend's release day back in 1998, a bunch of the cast and crew hired a limo and drove around LA going from cinema to cinema just to see what the reception was like. They would apparently stand at the back of packed cinema after packed cinema, enjoying hearing the audience laughing and screaming at the film they had been so passionate about making together. And that, my dear viewer, was a deep dive into the film Urban Legend. I did intend to cover the entire franchise in this deep dive, however this episode ended up being quite lengthy, so I decided to trim that part out. I am considering doing a ranking of the franchise or a mini review of each of the 3 films, so if that's something you're interested in, do let me know. But I haven't decided if I'll put that on this channel or on my Patreon page. Either way, I will let you know if I do it and where I'm going to release it. Speaking of my Patreon page, these names, whichever side I'm going to put them at, on the screen are my wonderful Patreon members, and if you'd like to become a member as well, I will leave a link to my page down in the description box. So far, in the last 2 weeks since it's been live, my Patreon members have had a movie review of Saltburn, an episode talking about my trip to the For the Love of Horror convention, who I met, what I bought, a commentary track for a watch along with Saw, and early access to my most rewatched horror films. And I'm just about to film a physical media haul for them as well. It's a way for you guys to support the channel and, mainly for me to be able to give you guys extra content that I wouldn't necessarily put on on this channel. As always, let me know your thoughts on Urban Legend. Is it one that you rate? Have you even seen it? Do you simply think it's a Scream knockoff? For me, it's definitely one that I have come to like more over the years with more rewatches. If you're new here, then please don't forget to subscribe to join the What the Horror family, and if you liked this episode, please give it a like as it helps the channel and pleases the YouTube masters. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.